So we're going to be talking about the whole concept of the antiviral effects of a plant-based diet. Now, unless you've been under a rock or in a cave or somewhere, I'm sure you are aware of the fact that we've been under this pandemic, and it's been 2 years, probably longer than that. And there are a lot of people, and as people come in, I'm going to ask you to mute your microphones as you come in. And it's really taken the world by storm, and certainly here in the United States, and many individuals have been affected in many ways, mostly adversity, unfortunately. And the unfortunate thing, and I've had a number of conversations with Dr. Campbell, personally, and the unfortunate thing is you never really promoted the whole concept of health and optimal nutrition in the context of this pandemic. And so, we actually had a conversation on YouTube, and he shared some very interesting data that he had back since 1989 that they published. And it showed the antiviral effects of a plant-based diet. And I was really fascinated with this data. We use a plant-based diet in our practice for many illnesses, and we particularly use it for COVID and had good success with it. And so to see that he had this, data that's been for a while in publication for a while was very intriguing. And so he's kind enough to come on and share this data with us. So Dr. Campbell, without further ado, welcome to the show. And again, thank you for coming and working with us. And I just want to jump right into this data. You shared with me back last year, actually year before last, the data you had on the antiviral effects of a plant-based diet, and you were looking at hepatitis B virus. Why don't you take us back to that time and share that data with us?
Yeah, this goes back some years. I've been in this business for actually 65 years, believe it or not, since I was in graduate school. But in any case, back in the 1960s, I was involved in coordinating a program of feeding malnourished children in the Philippines. And the idea was malnourished children in the various 600 countries around the world, the idea was that they are malnourished because they don't get enough protein. Of course, that was my background, by the way. I had done a doctoral dissertation on protein, and I was pushing the idea that more protein we consumed, the better off we'd be, just like all my colleagues. And that basically meant animal-based protein. In any case, what I saw in the Philippines, surprisingly, after I finished my graduate school, I was at another university, Virginia Tech, actually. And in the Philippines, I came across some information that suggested that the children, the malnourished children, there were some of them got liver cancer. And the ones that got liver cancer, not many, but they seem to be coming from the families. They seem to be coming from the families that were consuming the most protein. It's really crazy. People consuming more protein, more cancer. That's the short some of the substance of it. Came back to my university, organized a study, and that was the beginning of my research career. And I wanted to see, is it true that animal protein turns on cancer?
Wow.
Okay.
Dr. Campbell, hold on 1 second. I'm going to mute everybody, and then I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. I think for some reason, everybody became unmuted. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Now, can you unmute? Okay, great. All right, go ahead and continue. Sorry about that.
So I don't know how much of that you heard me just what I just said.
No. So yeah, so you were talking about your push for animal protein, increasing animal protein consumption. Right.
So in any case, I came back to the laboratory, organized a study that was funded by NIH, by the way. So that's public money. I like to point that out because this wasn't any part of any industry. And I wanted to see whether it's really true that, higher animal protein meant more cancer. So this, what I'm showing you here is a slide of some of the data we got in experimental animals. We could actually, in experimental animal setting, these are rats, they get exposed to a carcinogen that gives rise to liver cancer. And so you feed them different levels of protein. And here's what we saw. I'm going to show you just one of about 50 of them, but this is probably one of the better ones. What's going on here? I'm not getting the, darn it.
It's got to animate there, huh?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Wrong buttons. Anyhow, over the first 12 weeks of the cancer growth, okay, feeding them 20% protein. What that means is 20% of total calories. That's on the high side. And this is basically an animal protein-based diet. So we feed them the higher levels of protein, we get this cancer growth. See how it's increasing over 12 weeks?
Yes.
Then we feed them 5%, no growth. In spite of the fact that in both cases, these animals started out from the same starting point. They both had the same genetic background. So the 20% protein turned on cancer, the 5% did not. So this is on the high side, this tends to be on the low side. So then we did something more, I'll show you quickly here. I wanted to see if, in fact, we switched the diet back and forth, like 20 to 5 and so forth, whether we could affect it. And we saw something pretty spectacular. If we fed 20% during the first 3 weeks, okay, they're going up that line there. There's the score right there. When we switch them to 5%, turns it off. 20% back on, 5%. I mean, this is pretty spectacular. And so I was reluctant to believe this stuff, that the high animal protein causes cancer. As I said, I came from the farm, I did all that background. So for me, this is a bit of a shocker. But this slide here, among many others, convinced me that animal protein was not a good thing. Plant protein doesn't do this, only animal protein. So animal protein turns on cancer. That's a little bit of background. Eventually, that led to lots of studies, got me into the idea of consuming plants, not animals, and so forth. Then we organized a study in China in the 1980s. And there in China, I was fortunate. That's when the United States and China were first starting to talk to each other. And a delegation from China came to the United States, and one of their leading scientists came, and we met, and he decided to stay behind and worked in my lab for another 8 months. Did some studies. And while he was in my lab, I learned that the Chinese had just published a book, an atlas of how much cancer occurred throughout the whole country.
Wow.
For 2,500 different counties. And so they published this book, and if I can slide that slide, I'll show you. What they learned was that for about a dozen different cancers, they were very high in some regions and very low in others. So it was a kind of a really neat idea that, cancer only occurred in certain areas, if you will. So we organized a study in China to see what we could learn about it. We set up eventually a total of 138 villages across China. We collected all kinds of information, dietary information. We took blood samples, we took urine samples, we asked questions. We had access to a lot of different diseases. And so we really had a chance to see if what I was learning in the lab, was equivalent to what we might see in humans. So let me go through that. And I'm just going to skip some things here. I wasn't prepared to do it quite this way, but we'll get there.
Well, that's okay.
It really became quite a story for me. Oh, let me start there. Anyhow, I got to a point eventually, this was from the late 70s on into the 90s. And in the late 90s, learned a lot of things. And that idea about animal protein turning on cancer, that to me suggested, well, maybe this works someplace else too, other diseases. Maybe it's just not animal protein itself. So I went through all those kinds of studies and finally came to the conclusion that this diet wasn't just specific for animal protein. It was actually animal food versus plant foods. And one of the things I could say about this in a general way, as people tend to increase their consumption of animal food, they decrease their consumption of plant food. Okay. So the effects that we tend to see in a normal human setting is a combination of consuming animal food, which got animal protein, and not enough plant food. Plant food's got good stuff. Plant food has all the good antioxidants and carbohydrates and so forth and so on. So it's a combination of things. Finally got to a point when, I'm going to show you here just a moment. If I can get rid of these little things here. I want to show you just a summary. Oh, let me say this here. This all came out, the study came out in the early 1980s. It was publicized quite publicly. New York Times had a lead story on it and so forth and so on. Finally, in 2000, I decided to write a book. And in writing the book in the early 2000s about this story, I wanted to just show you a couple of slides here. First off, when I wrote the book with my son, by the way, who is a physician himself, and he's now in a medical center on a faculty there. But in any case, in those days when I was organizing this book and writing the book, it turned out I found in the literature prior to that a lot of evidence that had been ignored to suggest that when people consume what I call a whole food plant-based diet, all these diseases, there's evidence for all these different diseases that this diet helps to prevent, maybe slows them down, or even cures or reverses a lot of these diseases. That's what Dr. Montgomery, of course, knows very well. That's what he's been doing in his clinic. And so that's just a summary, okay? We'll make a couple of remarks about that to get into the COVID thing. So here we are. I'm suggesting that all this information here showed this nutritional effect is very broad, involves lots of diseases. For starters, it's not just one nutrient. Very fast. And as I say, Dr. Montgomery can tell you better than I can tell you even, but it turns out when you put people on this kind of diet, let's say they got a health problem, you can see results beginning to occur within, 1 to 2 days. Like cholesterol in the blood starts to drop and sugar starts to drop for diabetics and so forth and so on. So it's a very broad effect, a very fast effect. And if we maintain the diet, and that's key, I'm not talking about a drug protocol in this case. I'm talking about the effect of the diet. If you stay on it, it's going to get better and better as going forward. So let's say if we sustain it, here's what we learn. The whole food plant-based diet treats a variety of illnesses and disease with no side effects. Essentially no side effects, which is exactly the opposite of what we do, most of us in the country. We tend to eat the wrong food. We get sick. Vast majority of people over 60, 70 or so, they got a serious diseases like this, and they're in trouble and they have to rely on drugs. This is exactly the opposite in many ways. If one takes a nutritional approach, they can pretty much stay away from drugs. I'm not an anti-drug person. I know there's places for them. But in this case, the nutritional effect does a pretty good job in making people well and controlling these diseases.
I like your emphasis on the point that it's broad because, in medicine, we sort of isolate certain conditions and I think they have the general public thinking in terms of, well, my left toe hurts, and so I need a left toe therapy, and I have a headache, so I need a headache therapy. And these ailments that we have they're broad ailments that require broad solutions. So I like the emphasis on the fact that nutritional effect is one that's broad because it puts the body in total biochemical and physiological balance.
Absolutely, excellent point, and that's exactly what we see. It's remarkable because, as Dr. Montgomery just said, rather than focusing on one thing, you just start doing this, and it addresses a whole lot of problems simultaneously, pretty fast and so forth. Now I want to go. I'm sorry, I got the wrong. I had to pull up the wrong thing here. Let me go back just a second.
That's a good point about holism versus reductionism.
Yeah, that's another whole book, as you know.
Yeah. Good one at that.
Okay, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to jump way down this right here. Let's try here. Okay, there's my slide I just showed you. Now, I want to make note of something. Most of these diseases that had been studied in the past, not in reference to the whole food plant-based diet, it just so happens they got results that supported the idea. And the researchers who were doing this prior to that time, they didn't think of a whole food plant-based diet, but nonetheless, the results they got addressed all these things here. So these are all, we call them degenerative diseases for the most part. Cancer, cardiovascular disease, multiple sclerosis, not kidney stones, but kidney cancer at least, osteoporosis, diabetes, so forth. And so I just posed a question here. Here's all this stuff here. When I put this together a few years ago, there's no viral diseases listed here.
Mm-hmm.
No viral diseases. So the question came up when the pandemic first came out a couple of years ago, a little over. I was just curious, just thinking about it. I think we got some data from China. We did that study in China first in 1983, and then we did it again in 1989. So the data is from 1989 here. So I'm going to tell you about viral diseases, whether this diet works on viral diseases, like it does on heart disease and cancer, so forth. There's a bunch of viral diseases, in case we've forgotten what they are. Some of them are pretty serious, obviously. HIV, AIDS, measles, hepatitis, so forth and so on. Common colds, we can live with that off and on. Flu, polio is serious, obviously. These are all viral diseases. And here's the question. Does this information apply to COVID-19? When I first heard this pandemic breaking over a couple of years ago, as I say, it occurred to me, maybe this COVID-19 thing might be addressed in that way. So, here's a quick summary of the China study itself that I'm talking about. This was a really huge study. The New York Times called it the Grand Prix of all studies at that time, got a lot of attention for it. But basically, in the first part of the study, there was 6,500 people lived in 130 villages. Second time, that's one I'm going to use. There's almost 9,000 adults in 138 villages. But anyhow, we looked at a bunch of different data factors, and the book was published in both English and Chinese, and each page, a big book, almost 900 pages, for all these different things we had measured. We got 2 pages for every one thing. So we had a lot of information on that. This is the second study. It came out, and as I say, it was done in 1989. And the second one is what I want to show you some data here. Kind of exciting. One of the diseases, let me show you on the lower right-hand corner here, there's a little map of a bunch of different diseases showing that, in this case, it's breast cancer. You see little red spots?
Yes.
Breast cancer is much more common in those places than other places. That's why we could do this study, because we had a chance to collect information in people who live in where there wasn't much breast cancer and other places where they had a lot of breast cancer. And as I say, one of the diseases we had was a viral disease. It's hepatitis B virus, a nasty virus. A lot of people haven't heard too much about it, but actually it kills in the neighborhood of 800,000 people a year around the world, mostly in Africa and Asia. But significant amounts too in the West, I guess. Here, you just listen to me here on this, how I'm trying to design it. This is a scheme. Here's a virus out here in the community, okay? Mm-hmm. Viruses come and go, we know that. We don't know when they're going to come, and they show up in the community, maybe in the air, maybe in the water, some other ways, but they're out in the community, the active virus. The active virus, we call it antigen. So this is the antigen for the protein on the surface of the hepatitis. But anyhow, there's the active virus. It comes in and it lands on us in the human body. At that point in time, it doesn't cause any symptoms right away, but we can test positive for it, and that's where we get the idea of positive cases, test cases. When a virus comes in and it comes into our body, we can see whether or not we got it. Now it can either go to, let's say, it's got 2 ways to go. A virus can either on one hand do us dirty work, come down here, cause liver cancer, that's the symptoms. Or if we're lucky enough, we got a good immune system, that virus can be inactivated by forming antibodies. Okay, so this is true more or less for all viruses, whatever they do. They come in, they can cause their problems, or we can have some immune system ready to go and sort of deactivate the virus. So here's what we found on that. we had this set up here. So I'm going to ask the question here, what kind of nutrition favors virus, immunity up here, you see up here. So we had a lot of information and all kinds of nutritional factors to compare this, that, and everything else with that to see what might cause it to go that way. Here's the results that we essentially got. I'm just showing it once again, it's more or less the same scheme. The virus comes in, it's a live virus. Here it is in our body right here. What we found was that people consuming more plant-based food, they're the ones that formed antibodies. And here's sorry, getting into some science here, but the data that we had was really, really powerful. All of the data I'm telling you here was significant, a high level of probability. So it's the strongest data I think I've ever seen in my life. People consuming more plant-based foods, when they got the virus, seemed like no problem. They formed antibodies. And it was less antigen, more antibodies. And as indicated by all these different factors, here's a bunch of new protein factors. Here's a bunch of protein things that cause the antigen to go down. Here's a bunch of protein things from plants cause the antibody to go up. Here's what happens though, however, people consume animal food. If they consume some animal food, in China, that's what we saw, they're the ones, the active virus went up, stayed up. It stayed up. Cholesterols went up, liver cancer went up, and they're the ones that got the liver cancer. And of course, people consuming some animal food in that study, they did not form antibodies. And that was measured in different ways. So I want to emphasize again, this study was really, really robust in a sense. We had lots of evidence, all pointing in the same direction. So consuming more animal food, those people, they kept carrying the virus around. They got the liver cancer. People consume more plant food, they got the antibody. There you have it. It's just a really stark between the two. And that's the same thing that we obviously have been seeing for years with heart disease and diabetes and cancer, all those other things I just told you about. Now, one of the criticisms that we can raise, one of the questions I guess you could raise is, this virus it's caused with liver cancer. It's not the COVID-19 thing. And so some of my colleagues would say, wait a minute, you're going too far here. Don't talk about COVID-19. Well, it turns out that when these viruses come to our body, they all go through our immune system. That's our defense mechanism. And the immune system is very complex and it produces antibodies and some other stuff. And anyhow, the viruses come in, and for all the different viruses, you may have a variety of symptoms. Some cases, the virus might cause HIV/AIDS and other so forth and so on. And so, but they all tend to respond the same way when you look at the biochemistry. If we have a good immune system, then we don't pay the price with the virus. The virus comes and goes. We might see some sickness a little bit here and there, but the really serious stuff, like dying, we can kind of control that if we just eating plant-based foods. I just thought this was really, really quite exciting.
And I like your emphasis on the common ground, because we try to, as you alluded to in your comments, we try to say, well, that's hepatitis B virus and liver cancer, but this is COVID-19. And so, really the body is, your immune system is your immune system, and your immune system in the ideal setting and the mechanism we look at, you have the innate part of the immune system and the adaptive part of the immune system. And what a plant-based diet does, it puts your body in biochemical and physiological balance. And in the context of that, you have a healthy immune system that not only is it robust and can fight viruses, but it can turn itself off. And so that's what people fail to understand. It's not like you're treating disease in isolation. That's that reductionism that you often talk about, certainly in your book Whole. And I like the way you present this data, and especially this slide, because the immune system is the common denominator. And we talk about, other issues such as, this pill or that pill or whatever the case is. But I think we have to think of the body as a whole and think of these systems as a whole. And so the same thing that enables you to, reverse diabetes or reverse arthritis is the same physiological biochemical process that helps enhance your immune system.
Yeah, that's really an excellent point, obviously. And so the question I would add to that still going forward, this diet that Dr. Montgomery and I are talking about, this whole food plant-based diet, it has such a broad effect. I showed you in one of the previous slides. It seems that all these different diseases, they are helped by consuming plant-based foods. They are hurt when you start consuming animal-based foods or some other things that are wrong with the diet. And it would be really strange if nature decided to use this diet to prevent and reverse heart disease, diabetes, and so forth and so on, then to use the same system and do the opposite with viruses. It makes no sense. And so I'm willing to go out on a limb on that one, because I say that, not only the viruses go all through the immune system, but quite frankly, the thing that prevents the virus from causing us problems is the same kind of diet that prevents heart disease, reverses, so forth and so on. I mean, nature, she was pretty smart when she worked on us for a few million years and created a system. And she's not going to say, on one hand, increase this disease and decrease another one. That doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, what Dr. Montgomery just said is right on point, because we have a common system that our bodies use to react against these pathogenic things. I want to show you here just one more thing, if I got it. Sorry, I should have been better prepared for this. I thought.
Well, this is great.
Okay, what else have we got here? Okay, so anyhow, what I just showed you was hepatitis. Now I want to show you what I stuck my neck out saying. What about COVID-19? It's here, okay? So I'm just repeating the thing here. Here's a COVID-19 out there in the environment, so forth and so on. It comes and lands on us. The active virus is there. These are positive cases. They don't yet have the system, but we test positive. A lot of people can test positive and they don't necessarily suffer the consequences. Some do. Anyhow, here's a virus sitting here, or if we got a good immune system, it pushes it toward the antibody formation. Otherwise, it comes this way. And by the way, in this study in China, I should tell you, the animal food effect on causing that virus to cause us damage was remarkable in the sense that in that part of China, the amount of animal food they were consuming is only like 10% of what we do in the West. In other words, it was only a small amount of animal food they were consuming that caused that virus to act up and cause the liver cancer. I mean, that was part of the story that I found really striking. And of course, as animal food is increased, worse and worse and worse. Now, here's where the whole food plant-based diet comes in. As I just already alluded to before, we got the active virus sitting there. If we have the whole food plant-based diet, we get antibodies. Very nice. Okay. On the other hand, that same whole food plant-based diet, it blocks us from getting the disease. That combination, get antibodies, less disease or no, certainly the serious diseases. And I want just one more thing here, and you can see this thing in probably very fast. So based on just the cholesterol dropping in a day or two and sugar and so forth, the whole food plant-based diet, one of the things I find so remarkable about that, and actually you might want to say more about this, but.
Well, I agree with that. We've treated a number of patients with COVID-19. As one person that I speak about, and this lady had COVID, and she became very ill and went to the emergency room after passing out, and we put on a raw plant-based diet. We did add some supplements, but she was feeling better in a matter of 4 hours, and the very next day she was back to normal in terms of symptoms.
Really?
Yes, and so and what happens is that what we see in the data we've seen in our studies with plant-based diet, you reduce cytokines and you reduce inflammations. And one thing I want to emphasize to people is what makes you sick from a viral infection or an infection in general isn't simply the infection per se, but it's your immune system going awry. So it's with your immune system which if you're consuming a poor diet, your immune system is in disarray. Your inflammatory markers are confused, they're scattered. And so when a virus or a bacteria attacks you, the immune system will be sluggish to respond initially. So that makes more virus gets in on board. And then once it does respond, there's an over response. And so there's an excessive response. And so there's increased inflammation. Well, a plant-based diet, not only does it keeps the immune system organized and awake so it responds rapidly, so you create this antibody formation effectively, but also your killer T cells and neutrophils are effective as well. But it also allows the body to turn itself off. So it keeps the immune system organized, alert, and under control. And that's the type of immune system that you need. What will kill you with the COVID infection or any other bacterial infection or microbial infection is not simply the infection, but rather an immune system that's out of control and it's in disarray. A disarray, out of control immune system allows increased infection, and then it allows or causes an overwhelming immune response. And that's when you see patients go into ARDS, go into cytokine storms, and get septic and die. The beauty of a plant-based diet is once you put it on board, and as Dr. Campbell so wisely pointed out in the data here, it has a pro-immunity effect, but it also allows the immune system to turn itself off as in an organized manner to keep you from getting progressively ill.
That's beautiful. By the way, there's one more thing that you touched on that, a couple of things here, the way I look at it. Number one, the virus, the first line of defense, or I should say the main line of defense, is our ability to be able to form antibodies going forward. And once we're able to do that, you should memorize that effect. And if you get infected later, it's okay. But we took some of these data, Baxter, you may recall, we took some of these data from the human study, went back to the lab and tested in a mouse model what happened there. In this mouse model, so to speak, we called it, these animals are getting liver cancer. It's in their genes. It's a group of mice that automatically get liver cancer if you start feeding them stuff. And in any case, we found that the higher the consumption of animal protein in these mice, that's when the liver cancer formed. If we decrease the animal protein down to what is normally used for good purposes, no liver cancer. What we saw in that was really quite amazing. And that is the animals fed the animal protein, turning on the cancer. Another thing that they did was to actually decrease what we call as natural killer cells, which is part of that cytokine storm thing that Baxter just talked about. And that was, as I say, about 30 some years ago. T cells weren't known at that time, hardly. I think we were one of the first to do that. And it was actually thanks to a colleague of mine who had got access to that. But the T cells are now, when we get the disease, in the first couple of weeks, our immune system organizes these T cells that really attack the virus straight off while it's going back to the shop and making some antibodies. So the T cells are really critical stage, and they play a role in the cytokine storm. And what we found is the higher protein diet in these animals actually decreased the ability of the animal to form T cells. So in other words, people consume an animal protein diet, they don't have the capability of forming T cells. And I'm really convinced this works in humans too, number one. And number two, they're not able to form the antibodies. So you get hit up the side of the head, it says two different ways, which is kind of fascinating. And by the way, the T cells, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around here too far. The T cells right now become a topic for conversation, have become a topic for conversation because just in the last, you may have seen this, Baxter, that in the last, there's all of a sudden discussions about T cells, like it was a brand new discovery. And people are talking about, oh, these T cells are amazing. What we need to do is figure out how to build a drug against them. None of them are mentioning the possibility that diet can control T cells. It's amazing. And just about a week ago, somebody just discovered that there's about 200 different kinds of T cells.
Yep.
So now they're going to put in a few $1 million to figure out which T cells does what to cause a drug. It just shows to me that, I don't know, the insanity that exists in our system. That when we
I think that's the right word.
Yeah, the first thing we want to do is go back to the lab and try to find some specific drug, if we can make it, to hit one thing when there's a million things that we might consider. It's crazy. It's crazy. Okay, I'm going to quit there, Baxter. I thought I had something more here, but.
No, this is good. This is excellent. One thing, you and I talked about before coming on, and we've been getting some questions in the text here. And I've been answering them on the chat. I'm gonna answer some of them out loud to the whole audience. I think everybody's been seeing them in the chat and seeing my answers. But you and I shared. I'm gonna share an article that you and I talked about. Let's see here. Let me pull this article. Now, you mentioned that there were multiple studies, and what I'm going to do is share this one study we talked about on our show, and I'm just going to give a quick synopsis and get your comments, Dr. Campbell. But essentially, this was a publication in British Medical Journal, and they looked at, in other words, several studies that hypothesized that dietary habits may play an important role in COVID-19. So that was a hypothesis. So they looked at healthcare workers. Now it's important to realize these are healthcare workers. And the importance of that is that these were people who had a relatively high exposure to COVID-19. These are people who worked in a hospital. And I think a simple majority of them were nurses and people who had bedside exposure. That's really important because when you do a study, you want to understand what the population is like. Now, if we did a similar study on people who were, hiding in their bedrooms or isolated from the general public, then that would be a different population. But there's a population of people who had high exposure, really important. And then they looked at that they were from 6 different countries: France, Germany, Italy, Spain, UK, and the USA. And as I mentioned, had substantial exposure to COVID-19. In fact, they looked at the exposure, and if they detected the exposure was low, they excluded them from the study. And that's really important to know because you want to test a group that's highly challenged with this disease state. And it took a survey, a web-based survey, from the July 17th to September 25th of 2022. And what they did is surveyed the types of diets. There were 3 diets that they isolated. One was a plant-based diet, a vegan diet as they describe it. The other was a pescatarian diet, so plants plus fish. And then the other diet, and they compared it to the standard Western diet. Then the other diet was like the keto diet, the high protein, low carbohydrate diet. And let me just kind of go down to the real summary here, because I'm not gonna, and you got.
So what are you seeing on your screen?
I'm gonna go down. I'm going down to the summary here.
Okay, because I am still seeing Dr. Campbell's presentation on the screen.
Okay. Let me. Okay, Dr. Campbell, why don't you stop share?
Okay.
And then let's see. Once you stop share.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Okay. Okay. So let me just go back up at the top so y'all can get a look at this. So this, for those you want to actually go and get this article, plant-based diets, pescatarian diets, and COVID-19 severity. Thanks, Jackie. That's why you co-host. A population-based case control study in 6 countries. So as I said, they looked at healthcare workers who had high exposure to COVID-19. This is important. They looked at 6 different countries: France, Germany, Italy, Spain, UK, and the USA. And they looked at, they did surveys, web-based surveys looking at the dietary history of these patients. So I'm going to go down to the findings. And I'm not going to get into the details of the different regression analysis models, but essentially what they did, they had 3 different models to control for 3 different sets of things. Model 1 controlled for essentially different countries. Model 2 controlled for the different countries and locations, plus the health conditions, and model 3 control for even more things. So they progressively control for more and more variables by the different models. The point simply is this: if you look at this graph here, there's an odds ratio, 95% confidence interval, and this line here means that there's no difference between one versus the other. And so that means equals. And this one equal sign is really the baseline standard Western diet. So if you ate a plant-based diet, to the left favors less severe symptoms of COVID, to the right, more severe symptoms of COVID. The line equal to the symptoms of COVID of the standard Western diet. They clearly saw that a plant-based diet in green here reduced the symptoms of COVID. And if you compare the plant-based diet to the high protein, low carbohydrate animal diet, you had roughly in all the models about a 4-fold reduction in COVID severity in the plant-based diet compared to the animal-based diet, 4-fold reduction across the board. Anyway, I'll say 3.5 to 4-fold reduction, which is very powerful. And the reason I share that with you is that it underscores, and I'll stop my screen share, and feel free to look that article up, those of you who have scientific backgrounds. But in science, what we do is that we like to look at different pieces of evidence. And I'll ask my colleague to chime in on this in a minute. And so you get one study here that points in this direction, another study points in this direction. And maybe these studies are biochemical studies. But then if you do a clinical study and it points in the same direction, so you get multiple studies at different levels. So what Dr. Campbell shared with you is biochemical mechanisms. Okay, how can this work? And he clearly showed you, but mechanistically, what happens. And he looked at antigen, antibody formation, and the like. That's the bedside. Now, this study shows in the clinical setting what happens clinically. Does this hold up in the real world? And what we saw here is that it does. Plant foods are more protective than animal-based foods, which is the same thing that he saw in his biochemical study. So again, it's really important that you see the strength of this. So it's not just one little study that you see, but there are many studies that are layered that support and points in this direction. That's how you read the data, and that's how you keep from getting confused. So you may see someone on the line say, well, it doesn't matter what you eat. The question you ask them is that show me studies that say it doesn't matter what you eat, and show me multiple studies that say that. And then ask, well, are there studies that show that it does matter? And what we're showing you tonight is that there's studies that does matter. Dr. Campbell had this data from 1989 against hepatitis B virus, and we're seeing clinical evidence that shows that, yes, this plant-based diet is effective in suppressing COVID virus infection. And there are many other trials. So Dr. Campbell, what are your thoughts? You did mention to me that there are other studies as well that were similar to this, clinical studies recently.
Yeah, it's a good summary on that study, Dr. Montgomery. On that study you just reported, by the way, in the abstract, one of the key numbers I found really interesting. Essentially, severe symptoms from COVID were reduced by 73% among those people consuming basically a plant-based or pescatarian diet. My point about saying it that way, it probably would even be greater if the pescatarian part of it wasn't part of it.
That's
or
right.
If they had a more accurate way to discern what people are eating. You
That's
know,
right.
you can ask people if they eat a plant-based diet. A lot of people say, yeah, but it's not, quite what Dr. Montgomery's been talking about necessarily. So that study on the face of it was a little bit weak to detect anything. And the fact that it saw something so significant, that's a big deal.
Yep.
That's a big deal. And so there were two more studies after that now have shown much the same thing. So you can, and what I wanted to tell you a little side story. I don't know whether you want me to say this or not, but
Oh, go ahead.
But, I took the data we had the first data. So it was a year ago, I wanted to publish it. Well, I published a lot over the years. I published over 300 papers in the journals. I sent this paper in to get it published. And in the title, I said, this is hepatitis B virus like that. And then part of the title says COVID-19 ? So all I was saying in this paper was, look at the data on hepatitis B virus. I think this is really important. And I was suggesting ? I think this here applies to COVID-19. Well, sure enough, that came out in February. Then thereafter, 3 studies came out. Dr. Montgomery just mentioned one. 3 studies showing, yes, it does. Well, when I sent it into a journal, I won't give the name at the moment, but it was a big name journal. I published there first time 50 years ago. Do you know, this is the first time this happened to me in my entire career. They wouldn't even send it out for review.
Wow.
Now, I'd leave you folks to, you might not be familiar with the publication business in science, but what we get in science, if you get something, you're encouraged to publish it. If it's good, you get a review and so forth and so on, then it's called peer review. I never had the experience of actually being told up front, we're not going to review your paper. Now, why? So the question I'd ask, just anybody, why did they do that? Why are these authorities blocking information of this kind? That's a pretty serious matter.
It's huge, and I don't think the audience is blind to the fact of what's been going on at the political level, and so it's very, very unfortunate. And in my experience, and I'll make these comments. I know we're coming up on the hour, but in medicine, we've always been aware that the medical community has been compromised to a certain extent. You have big pharma, and they, control a lot of our publications and the like. But it's this whole coronavirus situation has really shown how the scientific community has been really compromised at very high levels. In government and big business and the pharmaceutical industry has a lot of power and control over our industries. And it has a lot of power and control over the truth. And having the truth be told is just something that's been made close to criminal. We've had our YouTube channel shut down multiple times for just simply telling the truth. And so it's really a tragic situation that we're faced with. It's always been there, I imagine. It's just that now it's much more evident. And the fact that and this distinguished scientist can't get your data reviewed, it's really tragic. And the reason we're building this community is because we're able to come and talk about these types of things and educate you here in this environment, away from the public media. We have a YouTube channel with a good size population, but we cannot tell this kind of truth on that YouTube channel. So we had to start this optimal health community so that you as individuals can be armed with this type of information. We're not just coming on and saying, oh, plant-based diet is healthy. Dr. Campbell has shown you the detailed biochemical evidence. We're sharing the articles with you. We make this data available for you to go and look at, download, and review for yourself. So we want to empower you with the knowledge to make the proper healthcare decisions and proper lifestyle decisions for yourself. A couple of things, a number of questions have come up about the vaccine. It's my opinion that a whole food plant-based diet is superior to the vaccine. Insight on this. If you were debating someone on plant-based diet versus vaccine, what would be your take on it?
Well, first thing I'd like to preface my comments is that, I got into science almost accidentally when I was young, and I grew to really like science as a discipline. And the reason I did is because science classically is sort of this is a situation. You look at something, you see something, you wonder whether it's right or wrong. You make a hypothesis. So you say, I think it does this and this. Then you do the study. When you do the study, you have to do it in open, fresh air. Your colleagues look at it and you draw your conclusions, and then you share it with your colleagues. If your colleagues say, yeah, I'll go along with that, then you get it published. That's what's called peer review. I love science because what it does, it really pushes us to be honest. It really pushes us to be really honest and to go forward, ask questions, never be afraid to be skeptical about what we see. This is what I have seen be sacrificed during these times. I have to say that because I spent, unfortunately, I guess, quite a long career, sort of challenging things from time to time. I get in trouble. But, we have now the vast majority of scientists, without a doubt, are very honest people. That's not the issue. But the problem is that when our research is controlled the way it is oftentimes by corporate money, we can't exactly say the things we have come to believe. And Dr. Montgomery, I just want to compliment you because you're one of the people that speak out. You say it the way you think it is. That's a real plus. And that debate that you're talking about having, that's exactly what we should have. The public's not getting access to, getting people who, I mean, if I'm wrong, I want somebody to tell me you're wrong. You're flat out wrong, and here's why. I welcome debate. I'm prepared to be wrong on things, and that's what the beauty of science really is. So what you're saying, you asked a question, I forgot what your question was.
Yeah, what would your take if you were asked plant-based versus vaccine?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Based on what I shared with you, some of what I rely on, the first thing I say before I say anything, because people tend to listen to us if they think we know stuff, I guess. But the first thing I say, every individual has a right to determine what they do with their own bodies. To me, that's sacred. That is absolutely sacred. So I don't want to say something here that, will influence anyone else unless you inform yourself. So you have a responsibility when you make a decision of this sort, whether it's this or something else, just inform yourself. The tragic part of it is most of us can't get informed in public. So now, having said that, I have no doubt about it. The plant-based diet, creating an effective immune system, to me, is the way to go. Without a doubt. I think it's superior. It's superior to trying to use chemicals or such to try to control the health issues that we have. Because I have become, I don't know, I don't think I'm too enthusiastic, but I'm 88 years old right now, and I really don't take any drugs. It's kind of intentional.
Yes.
I lost my father when he was 70 from heart disease. My wife lost her mother when she was 51 from colon cancer, and et cetera, et cetera. Our family was like a lot of people. We lose people early on. And so I decided early on in my career, my wife and I, and so I think we should have the right not only to choose this course, of something like doing for ourselves, but especially we should have the opportunity to debate things publicly.
Yes,
really
yes.
important. That's the key. I mean, so if we can be wrong, okay, we're big enough. We can take it on. If somebody can prove us wrong, that's not the issue. It's just,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly. The fact that they got rid of public debate is really, and that they're trying to cover things up, and so it's really problematic. And we're going to get into this on the debate of the vaccine, and we'll be talking about this Thursday night. I'll be debating Dr. Milton Mills and Dr. Columbus Batiste. So just in case you guys know any of these doctors, so this will be the debate. Dr. Campbell, I want to thank you very much for giving us an enlightening discussion and educating all of us on the mechanisms of how plant-based diet can enhance our immune system. And I want to ask the audience to give them a thumbs up and a digital round of applause in the session. This has been very enlightening. And again, we'll have this on replay for those of you who came in late and who had to leave early. But more importantly, I want all of you to share what we're doing here with friends, loved ones, colleagues. This is a movement that we're starting. The Montgomery Heart and Wellness Optimal Health community is one where we're building and we're strengthening individuals by informing them and giving you the information. So this first week, this free week is just a sample of what we're going to be doing on a regular basis. And this is, in my opinion, is an alternative to the standard sick care system that many people are trapped in. And this community-based approach that we're using is going to evolve into a comprehensive health system that's going to start with the components of information, education, and community support, and the freedom of exchange of information, so that you can actually take control of your own health and achieve optimal health goals and not just be trapped in the medical system. So again, thanks to each of you for joining us tonight, and special thanks for Dr. Campbell, and thank you, Jackie Williams, for co-hosting. All of you have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next live event. Everybody take care.